The stopgap measure was approved in the Senate 65-35 and shortly afterwards passed the House 254-175. It does not include any provision to raise the nation's debt ceiling, as the Democrats had wanted to do. So we have a little more than 2 weeks to prevent the first ever default for America. In addition, there's the $3.5 trillion social spending package, which we've been told is more like $4.3 trillion now, with moderate Democrat Joe Manchin saying he's willing to work on a reconciliation bill with a much smaller $1.5 trillion price tag. What does it mean for the majority Democrats? Well, with me now to talk about this and more is Congressman Buddy Carter, who is a member of the House Budget Committee and a member of the GOP Doctors Caucus. He represents the 1st Congressional District of Georgia. Congressman Carter, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what's your take on what's happening with all of this spending in Washington, D.C. this week?
Well, first of all, this is nothing more than a cradle-to-grave government dependency that's being created by the Democrats. And, we've got to stop this insanity, all this spending. We've got to cut out the credit cards here in Washington, D.C. We got to stop printing money and stop saddling future generations with this enormous debt. And we've got to stop raising taxes. Keep in mind, when you talk about this $4.3 trillion socialist wish list, that they're also going to be raising taxes by $3 trillion. Joe Biden's right. He's going to be able to pay for it. He's going to pay for it on the backs of the taxpayers. That's exactly what he's going to do. And it's only going to serve to embolden our enemies, the Taliban, the China, Russia, India, Iran, That's what's going to happen. And that's who's going to benefit from all this. This is total chaos. It's financial insanity.
Now, we hear about this October 18 deadline, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that's the deadline that lawmakers have to prevent a first ever default. Now, we're familiar with the federal government shutting down. We've been through that. It didn't seem to have any long-term impact. Is that what we're facing? Again, another potential federal government shutdown, or is it something more than that?
Well, it is more than that. If the debt ceiling is not taken care of, if it's not extended or raised, then we're going to default. And the United States government has not ever defaulted on the money that is owed here. There is enough money, and we have. This is nothing more than a ploy by the Democrats in order to get their $4.3 trillion socialist wish list through. We've got enough to cover the first 7 months of the Biden administration and of the commitments from the Trump administration. But we don't have enough to cover their $4.3 trillion spending bill. That's what's important to note. But it would be a first if we don't do something if the Democrats don't do something with the debt ceiling. It would be the first time that we've defaulted. And of course, that would be horrible for the United States and ruin our credit rating and cost us. It would cost us in the future. It would be an awful scenario. I can tell you that.
And I want to know if you can explain a little bit more what that means, because it's something that I don't think most of us understand. Like in our personal lives, we might have an idea of what it means if we defaulted on a loan. But what does it mean if the U.S. government defaults and doesn't make its payments?
Well, it means that our securities, what we use as collateral, will no longer be any good. And certainly that would be a first, as I say, for the United States. And look, there's no excuse why this should be happening. I mean, the debt ceiling, the Democrats, they can solve this. They can solve it without the Republicans' help. They don't need us. Mitch McConnell has made that clear in the Senate that the Democrats can do this. And if they're going to do this, they need to do it so that this never happens again and that we are not faced with this kind of situation.
Is there a scenario where in the future where we aren't consistently, almost on a schedule, raising the debt ceiling just to keep operations going?
There is, and there's been a lot of talk about that. There's the debt ceiling was put into place to kind of force us to have some financial responsibility, but all we've done is just simply to raise the debt ceiling or to extend it to a later date. And so it's not really achieving the purpose that it was originally set up for. So there has been a lot of talk about just doing away with the debt ceiling. And that would be awful in itself if we did away with it, because then there would be no reason for a lot of these spend-happy Democrats and spend-happy socialists, there would be no reason for them to curtail their spending at all. Of course, they're ignoring it anyway, so what difference does it make?
Well, let's talk about the other spending conflict that's happening right now in Washington, D.C. We know that the Senate has already passed an infrastructure bill, the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill, $1.5 billion. There's also this reconciliation package. It's somewhere between $3.5 trillion and $4.3 trillion. The progressives are really interested in getting this additional $4 trillion or so passed before they vote for the infrastructure package. Tell us what's going on there and how you think this is going to be resolved.
Well, how it's going to be resolved is going to be up to the Democrats. But you are correct. The Senate has passed what is you hear all kind of figures, 1.1, 1.2, but they have passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill that for the most part is for paying for what we would mostly consider to be traditional infrastructure. That is roads, bridges, airports, seaports, broadband. And I've said that I'm even willing to extend that a little bit further to include wastewater and safe drinking water and our electrical grid, making sure that we have a resiliency on that. I could extend the definition of infrastructure to include those things. But even in that bipartisan bill that was passed by the Senate, only about 56% of it is really for what we would consider to be the traditional infrastructure bill. Now, the 3.5 or 4.3 trillion dollar socialist wish list, that is nothing but socialist programs. That is nothing but progressive priorities. It is not anybody's definition of infrastructure. Now, they may call it human infrastructure, but it's not that. It's free college, free childcare, free everything. And it's only going to turn the American dream into a socialist nightmare. This is ridiculous what they are proposing here. And I need to warn you about this as well. Right now, the number that they're citing, 4.3 trillion, let's use that one. Now they're saying, well, we think we can get it down to 1.5 trillion. Well, even if they do that's just smoke and mirrors. Essentially what they're doing is they're putting the same programs into place, but just backing up the stop date on them. And that's no good whatsoever. They're going to still end up spending just as much money, even if they say it's only 1.5 trillion. If they keep all the programs in place that they have in there now, they'll still be spending that $4.3 trillion.
Is that your way of saying that you think the progressive version of this bill is inevitable?
Well, if it comes to fruition, there's going to have to be a lower number that's cited. So, the progressives are saying, oh, we're willing to compromise. Well, I just think that's theatrics. I just think that's politics that they're playing there. Whereas, you got Joe Manchin, you got Kyrsten Sinema, and they're trying to get them to give them a number. Supposedly Manchin has said 1.5. I haven't heard anything out of Kyrsten, so I don't know that she's got a number or if she has a number in mind. But I will tell you, this is dangerous for America. This is nothing more than a socialist wish list. This is going to turn the American dream into a socialist nightmare. This is going to come back to haunt us. We have to stop this insanity, this financial insanity. We've got to stop spending money and printing money. We've got to stop saddling future generations with this enormous debt. And we've got to stop raising taxes. The president says, oh, it's going to be on the upper income. Who's going to pay this? No. It's going to be on the middle class and the lower class. They're going to end up paying this. It's causing inflation. And what is inflation? Inflation's nothing more than a tax. And who does it hurt most? It hurts the middle class and the lower class most.
But President Biden did assure us that spending this additional $3.5 trillion would actually lower inflation. I don't know how many people are buying that, but we have received that promise. The polling indicates that the public doesn't really believe that. Now, I want to change subjects with you briefly, because you and several of your colleagues wrote a letter to the Biden administration, to President Biden this week, about his plan to fire essentially healthcare workers who do not get the COVID vaccine. And your concerns are that we're not actually going to become healthier by removing people who could spread the virus, but that we're going to become less healthy by removing critical healthcare workers from the system. Tell us more about what your concern is.
Well, my concern is just that there are going to be healthcare workers who are going to be fired or who are going to just quit. Look, 6 months ago, there were our heroes. Now they're running the risk of being fired. How much sense does that make? They're still our heroes. We still need them protecting our citizens. This is this dictator Biden, that he's trying to mandate to people that you must get the vaccine. What about those illegal immigrants coming across that border? They're unvaccinated, they're untested, yet they're coming into the country, yet he's telling people here in America that unless you get a vaccine, you're going to lose your job. That is simply ridiculous. The decision to get a vaccine should be a decision made by you and your physician, you and your healthcare professional, you and your family, not between you and the government. Look, I'm a strong advocate for the vaccine. I went through the clinical trials myself. I've had the booster shot myself. And I think it is safe and effective, but I am respectful of Americans who, for whatever reason, don't want to get the vaccine. I wish they would. I hope they do. It is safe and effective, but it's the decision between them and their physician, between them and their pharmacist, them and their family, not between them and the government.
Congressman Buddy Carter, really appreciate your time. We do got to go, but we'll look forward to talking to you next time. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.